For those who are returning, thanks for coming back. Those who are joining for the first time, this, of course, is session 2 of a 4-session leadership forum. As I mentioned earlier today, it's our 10th anniversary of doing this. And we will focus, as I've mentioned before, on individual leadership. We'll do that in, I think, a unique way, which is to really think about leadership through the crucible of challenges and failures and false starts, and it's not supposed to be sort of success after success, and very much on an individual basis. In each of the 4 sessions, as you know, we have heard and will be hearing from an alum with a unique personal story, lots of different perspectives on things. And we'll have a bonus session in March or April, the first warm day that shows up, where we have 5 or 6 days warning. We'll do something outdoors, almost surely with food, probably in the Brantford courtyard. And anybody who's attended these sessions will be invited to join. It'll be a fun way of pulling things together and also sort of seeing everybody in 3 dimensions. As a reminder, I'd ask you to ponder the following things, as we did in session 1. One is, what feels like an element that's necessary to lead? Something that without which you couldn't possibly have leadership. One of the articles posits that an example of that would be the need for change. If you don't have the need for change, can leadership truly arise? The second thing to ponder, in addition to sort of leadership elements, is which of the categories of leadership in the brochure that you got sort of talks to you, that resonates with you. Leadership and with communications and credibility in leadership, mission-centric leadership, leadership and equity, and so forth. Third thing I'd like you to continue to ponder is this very philosophical thing is, can we define leadership? How can we define leadership? Is it innate? Is it teachable? Is it experiential, circumstantial, things like that? It's interesting that Brian went right to that point on his own earlier today by kind of saying leadership is always unique. And I think he's right. And then sadly, because of the world we're now living in, this completely new world, how can leadership go off the rails? What can take leadership in the wrong direction? I don't think we should just assume that leadership is automatically good. So it's a dark thing. It's being, emphasized by Putin, but there we are. And then finally, as you think about your own groups that you're involved with, either on campus or off campus, how could some of the things you're hearing and talking about apply? Before I sort of introduce and hand things off to Johnny Bird, for whom we're very grateful for being here, let me remind you sort of the best way to do this. I'd love it if Johnny spends a little time sort of talking about whatever sort of is on his mind, and he and I have talked briefly before this session. But as you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in chat as you did this afternoon, and we'll see them, and everybody will have a chance to kind of speak up, and we'll make sure that you get to actually ask your question. You can start it by being in chat, and you don't really have to wait till there's a pause in the action. If it feels like something you really need to talk about in the moment, that's fine. I have, as you know, a half dozen or so questions which I can pose, and I'll pose them unless and until you do, but I'd really love it. I'm sure Johnny would agree if you put questions out there. And we'll try to wrap up no more than an hour or so from now. So that's actually less than that now, let's say 55 minutes from now, because I want to honor your time and the fact that it is the weekend. So in terms of our guest this time, our discussion leader, Johnny and I guess first became acquainted 2 or 3 years ago, was in the before times, as they say, where we actually could sit at a table without worrying about being masked and so forth. And we got to know each other. He's a terrific person, happens to be, as you've seen in the bio, an author and a business owner. He's a recent alum of the Div School. He works at Yale. And one particular thing which you would have noticed in his bio is that he participated as a member of one of the sort of best series of basketball teams in college history back before the turn of the last decade. He's written a book about that and other things. I don't want to go further than that because, as I said earlier when I was introducing Brian, everything you say about somebody accidentally narrows them. And, Johnny's got his own story. So Johnny, let me turn things over to you, and we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. I appreciate everyone being on the call. It is a Friday night, and that's always dicey when it comes to school-related or work-related things. So again, I want to just shout out you all for jumping on this Zoom today. Zoom has made it easier to connect, but it also has taken away some of the personal communications that we used to, take for granted. So either way, I'm happy you're here, and thank you. As Steve alluded to earlier, I am a recent graduate of Div School. I just graduated out of MAR for the Div School in December. And so to call myself an alum is pretty new, and I still haven't gotten the hang of it yet. But trust me, I'll be fine identifying myself as an alumni, because as a student, as you all know, it's tough. It's a grind, as the registrar's office likes to remind me when I was talking about classes and credits and degree auditing, that Yale offers a robust set of classes and schedules. So I'm sure all you guys can resonate with that. Before I did Div School, I was working at Yale. I still continue to work at Yale. And I work in the undergraduate part of Yale. And before that, I was at a for-profit university working. And even before that, I was at UConn, University of Connecticut. I am born in North Carolina, and effectively finished out my high school career here in Connecticut, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. For any of you guys who know where that is, it's about 25 minutes away from New Haven. And yeah, UConn, I very much so had I guess it was a non-traditional pathway there, to say the least. And FYI, if you guys have any thing in the chat, the way I got everything set up here, unfortunately, the screen is a little further away from me to be able to see what you say in there. So if there's anything pertinent, I'll ask Steve to.
We will make sure you know, John.
To let me know. So a bit about myself. Like I said, I went to UConn. I am a self-identified introvert. I got to preface that, because that is a major theme throughout all of the things in my life. And UConn is no different. I did not want to go to UConn. Being from North Carolina, my biggest thing I wanted to do was be a Tar Heel. First generation, coming from an inner city. Parents didn't go to college. Their parents didn't go to college. So navigating the college kind of pathway was just something that was a bit out of touch and a bit nebulous for me and my family. And but I did watch basketball. I played basketball. I loved basketball. And if you knew anything about college basketball and you're from North Carolina, you either wanted to be a Tar Heel or you wanted to be a Dookie. And I did not want to go to Duke. So I wanted to go to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. It was lofty. I know it wasn't like I had a pathway there either. It was just something I had, I've seen all my favorite basketball players go there. So it was like, all right, if I'm going to go to college, I'm going to go there. And like I said, I finished up my high school career here due to family circumstances. And that led me to get accepted at the University of North Carolina, but unfortunately not have the ability to, one, play basketball, and two, afford it. So if you look at my high school yearbook, actually, when they asked where you're going, I was committed to going to North Carolina. So it says University of North Carolina in my high school yearbook, even though I never attended there. I ended up going to UConn. UConn was like one of those, what do they call those, safety schools. And I ended up applying to UConn as a safety school. My guidance counselor, shout out to him, he told me, he actually recycled one of my resume and my one of my applications and my college essay to UConn, and just kind of threw it in the mail for me. So it was very much an afterthought attending UConn. I get in, and like I said, my eyes were set on UNC, and once that became no longer a viable option, my family pointed me towards UConn. Real first world problems, I know. But so I ended up going to UConn reluctantly, and because it was reluctant, I just was adamant on getting out. I wanted to leave, so bad, and being in the state of Connecticut, and like I said, being from Bridgeport, I felt like my friends were at arm's reach, but just out of touch for me. And unfortunately, I was homesick like most kids are in their first year. And being from the inner city, you're not really connected to the appropriate ways to transition into college. So nonetheless, I had a hard time. I had a hard time transitioning, I had a hard time setting up my schedule, I had a hard time just figuring my way through that massive campus that Storrs, Connecticut boasters. And I eventually found my way trying to salvage some type of athletic identity, because I'm no longer playing any sports at that time. And I've been known to play all three sports. I played football, basketball, baseball in high school, and not playing any sports, just going cold turkey, was not sitting well with me. So I went out for the baseball team. The baseball team told me that I could be on the team, but I had to go sit for 2 years at their satellite campus in Avery Point. And I've never heard of Avery Point, so I took it as a slight, and eventually said I'm not going to be playing there. I heard that you could walk on to the basketball team there at UConn, which I didn't know was even an option. It's basically a tryout. And a friend told me that he was going to go try out. I didn't think that I had a shot. So I just went to go watch him. So I go to watch him try out, and they tell me that there's no spectators in the gym at that time. You either had to try out or you had to leave. And so I had basketball shoes on. I'm playing basketball. Little I know I'm going to be trying out for the team, and little I know I'm going to make the first cut. I made the first cut. I made the second cut. I ended up on the team, but reality slapped me in the face that, you know, I like to fancy myself as a good basketball player. I did well in high school, but UConn was another beast. I mean, we had 7-footers on the team. I'm scraping 6 feet, 6'1" on a good day, depending on what shoes I have on. And it was just a whole nother level. So I eventually, they eventually told me that as a walk-on, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. You're the guy that's got to like carry all like the practice stuff and kind of just, you know, get out the way and don't hurt anybody. That didn't sit well with me. Again, coming from inner city, coming from my high school, I was quote unquote one of the stars of the team. We won state championships. I thought that I was qualified to play, and not at the very least not be treated as you know, kind of just background noise. So that didn't sit well with me, but I still continued on until I couldn't take it anymore. I ended up quitting about a month later. And so I told my family I made a team, and then I told them I'm not on a team, like all within a few weeks' time. And no one believed me anyway, so it didn't really matter. No one, if they don't see you out there with a UConn jersey or on the court, it's like it didn't even happen. But at this time, this is running into the second semester of the year. I'm not doing good. I wasn't attending classes. One thing about walking on to a team, you're not a scholarship player, which means that they're not prepared to have you on their team ahead of time. So your classes and your schedule are not, they're not around the schedule of the basketball team. And UConn basketball was big business. I mean, it was the biggest, it might still be one of the bigger income generators for the university and for the state for that matter. So basketball practice could be at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday. It could be at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday. It could be at 8 a.m. on a Thursday. Whatever time that they decided it was going to be, that's when it's going to be. And the guys had their, the scholarship players had their practices and their teachers aware of all those things. Whereas me, I did not. I just had a schedule that I came in with the summer with, and you know, my teachers, again, half the people didn't believe that I was on a team, so they weren't working with me in any capacity, and it wasn't like I was bringing it to them. I ended up getting on academic probation 2 semesters in a row, and then from there, you guys can surmise that 2-semester academic probation is upturning to be kicked out of the university. So I got that letter with all in red saying you're not welcome back. But I got that letter. My mom, who's been my #1 supporter at this time, did not get that letter. So unbeknownst to her, her kid is coming home for the summer and not having any place to go back to. She thinks I'm just coming home for the summertime. I'm trying to get all my ducks in a row to get transferred out and go somewhere else and not have her think anything different than it just me wanting to go to another school. That did not happen. All the schools that I was recruited to and basically passed on were no longer interested in me. I've been a year out with no tape and bad grades, and they've already recruited their teams and moved on past me. And ultimately, I had a choice, was to either stay home or try to get back into UConn. Being at home, it was, yeah, my friends are your friends and you have a lovely time hanging out when you're in high school. But that year after high school is a lot different than that senior year of high school. And I'm sure you all can attest to. You're just not the same people. I mean, you grow up really fast and you grow up a lot. And for my high school, that is conveniently located across the street from a level 4 state prison. And yes, you heard that right. Literally across the street from my high school is a state prison. So that high school to prison pipeline is literally real in my particular case. Some of my classmates, they either went and got jobs and so they didn't have time to hang out. They either had children, they had responsibilities, so we couldn't hang out, or they went to that prison that I mentioned, and a couple of did. And I lost 2 friends that summer, 5 in total in a span of a year, in terms of losing their lives due to violence, and one was due to a car accident. So I ended up having a long conversation with myself and realizing that I had to go back to UConn, even though I hated it there, and I just had to get back, because staying in Bridgeport, who knows where I would end up with in terms of my career or just my life. So I wrote to the dean. I, went back groveling basically, and they let me back in on a probationary period. And from there, I kind of just straightened up. I ended up walking back onto the basketball team, giving it a second shot, but I lost a year in terms of actual practicing and playing. So I had to get back, work double time just to get back on there and fall back in the good graces of the coaching staff and all that. And fast forward to my senior year, we were nationally ranked #1 and the best team in the nation and going to the Final Four. And I ended up getting playing time. I ended up having, through some luck and just being in the right place, the right time, ended up getting some points underneath my wings. And I ended up having a really good time. I mean, it turned out to be a really good time through college, and that propelled me to the life and the persistence that I've got today, basically. And that persistence has led me to become an author of The Toughest Two, which is a book about that transition from adolescence to young adulthood. And in the basketball, using basketball as more of like the background filler. And I've started a business. The business is called Do Mode, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. And I ended up getting my master's degree at Yale, even though I felt like that was in itself something that was impossible. So I met some great people along the way. I've fortunately have been able to learn from some good mentors, and through some of my work experience and my college experience, I've learned to be a good leader and follow good leaders. So I hope to bring some of that. Ultimately, I hope to bring some of that to you guys, some of the gems that I could share that I've learned over the years to you guys here. I want to leave space for questions and comments on the things that I just said in regards to my journey. But I also want to talk mainly about leadership. That's why we're all here. My main thing about leadership is that it is, there's not a one size fit all type of deal. It can't be, because just like on this call, just like in the real world, different people have different expectations, have different needs. And depending on where you're leading these people or how you're leading, depending on where you're leading these people will dictate how you lead these people. Now, for me being an introvert, I tend to lean on more of a hands-off approach. And some have been more hands-on, some have been more micromanagers, and some people need that. I understand that some people kind of just need direction and need constantly be told where they are at and how they operate. And for me, I'm the kind of individual that likes to be led in terms of, hey, here's the deadline, here's the goal, we'll check back in, a few days before or at the deadline to see where you're at. And if you have any questions in between time, let me know. So I operate more in a solitary way, but I know that's not for everybody. Fortunately enough for me, I was able to, one of the jobs that I had in the for-profit university, I was in a position where I've had to learn very quickly. And I ascended to become a manager myself, which is the leader of the biggest organization, the biggest campus of that particular organization at 20, I was at 24. So 24, I'm leading grown people who have, been in at the job for, decades. And just like I said, through circumstance, I kind of was put in a position where I became the manager of that particular department and branch. And I had to hit the ground running with that because one day our manager, who was at the department, she ended up just not showing up. There was a no call, no show. And someone had to step in on a day that I was working, and I kind of just filled in and did the reports that I knew that she had to run. And then from there, the company allowed me to continue to be the manager. Basically, they bumped me up and I had to lead these individuals. Week 1, I had to fire somebody. Now, I had no experience of being a manager before. I've never dealt with firing. I haven't been fired from the place, knock on wood. And so I had to fire somebody. So I had to learn how to talk to her about, where she was at. This is someone who I've been working with for a few years already at a colleague level. So we were at the same position, and, the first week they tell me I have to let her go. So that was rough. And then we had to hire people. Hired 4 people in my time doing that, and I had to learn through the interview process of how to deal with people, how to talk to people. So I had to learn very quickly how to manage a place, and I feel like I've learned, a decade's worth of information in a very short period of time at that place. And then fast forward, I get to Yale, where at my current position, I didn't have to be a manager. Being a leader is daunting, and it is not a responsibility that anyone should take lightly. But again, you have to be considerate. It's more about just your work and your metrics. You have to be considerate of everybody's work, everybody's metrics. And the one thing that I constantly say when it comes to being a leader is that when you're leading human beings, you're not leading robots. And what I mean by that is you're dealing with feelings, you're dealing with family issues, you're dealing with emotions. All those things that play a part that you might not consider a part of the workspace, but it is. And that may mean that, Jan, and as a colleague, she may have, a kid that gets sick. So you have to be empathetic for her and allow for her to, take care of her kid when maybe it's a busy day and you need Jan. Or maybe in my case, you have a sick grandparent. One of my grandparents has dementia. So sometimes she needs some extra care. And, so there's just many different dynamics in being in a workspace in general that you have to be mindful of as being a leader. And I think that the most effective leaders that I've seen, and the one that I hope to become, are the ones that are empathetic, the ones that realize that, hey, these are people, they have real lives. Now, the work does have to get done, and you have to have some real critical conversations sometime. And, sometimes that means you have to address the elephant in the room. But there's ways of going about doing that doesn't have to be dehumanizing, and you can be considerate of circumstances. And one of the big things, which I definitely would love to talk about, is you have to be considerate of people's personality trait. Meet them where they're at. There are extroverts and introverts in this world, and me being a self-identified introvert, I feel sometimes, or oftentimes, in the workspace and academic spaces, and sometimes even social circles, that kind of personality trait gets kind of chalked up as being shy and undervalued. And a good leader knows how to bring value out of any kind of personality trait. So that's my spiel on leadership. Open to any questions, anything that you may have, Steve.
That's terrific, Johnny. You and I have talked about some of these things before, kind of one-on-one in the Brantford Courtyard, and it's nice to hear you do it. And also, I know we all know this, but another elephant in the room is just being open and being vulnerable, and you're doing that by telling that story. It's a way of building trust, as we all know. Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but again, anybody who's on the call, feel free to put something in chat, and we will, you'll be piping up right after that. So along the way, who are some people that you've admired as sort of other leaders? And before you answer that, actually, let me just comment on a couple of things you said. You've emphasized some things I think that Brian said, and you've also gone in some directions that Brian didn't go in earlier today. You mentioned empathy. You mentioned leadership is unique and circumstantial. Totally agree. You mentioned being kind of hands-off as a leader, which I'm guessing what you mean by that is not just sort of what it literally looks like, but you're also playing to your own personality. If you're an introvert, it may be actually easier to be a little bit hands-off. I don't know. That's a wild guess. But Brian earlier, he talked about being sort of always willing to talk about specifics. I'm sure you are too, but it's just an interesting thing. Like, you mentioned the hands-offishness and he went another direction. But my question for you is, I didn't get to the question, did I? It's like, who have you grown to admire over time? Like, you can pick a 10 or 20 year time frame, depends on how you want to talk about that, but you're on a leadership journey. Who have you noticed who you think is or are great leaders?
The leaders who I'm not sure if you would know, well, I definitely know you wouldn't know that the first person on my list, which is actually one of my first jobs. It was a gentleman, his name is Jim Lavin, and he was, I worked at it was part-time at a town hall where my mom worked. And she got me the job as an internship when I would come home during the summers from school. And that's where I first learned about empathy and consideration. And meaning it was a very small department. It was the finance department in the town hall. It was 3 people in this department, and Jim, including Jim and myself. And we had a worker there that she would do everything. I mean, she was superstar there, and she basically allowed Jim to kind of be hands off because he didn't need to do anything. But whenever she needed to go grab her daughter, or maybe, had to go pick her mom up from the train station or whatever the case was, he always allowed her to do it because he knew that she was a workhorse. She was somebody that he could rely on, someone that is dependable. And he really showed me that kind of give and take in regards to relationships in a manager and subordinate relationship. Is if you're going to go hard, if you're going to be a person that I can rely on, I know you're going to get the work done, then I can give you leeway on the other things. And those are just having conversation and being open. I've been in other places where that is not the case, where, for lack of a better phrase, the management is cracking a whip and they just want you to go with no kind of leeway or anything and no consideration or anything. And unfortunately, those places, it's depending on how big those places are, those kind of individuals or that business or that company tends to not do so great, and they'll never chalk it up to their management style because a lot of people aren't aware, but the proof is in the pudding. And ultimately, I feel like being considerate in someone like a Jen Lavin is someone who I want to emulate as I've grown up and tried to become a leader myself. Is just that consideration. When I became a manager and had to hire my own people, that was one of the things that I was sure of people. One of the ladies that we hired, she was going back to school. She needed space and time to study. And, I was like, hey, study in the back if you need to, because she was the kind of person who I could depend on. And she was also kind of the person that, hey, if we needed someone to come in on a Saturday, she would come in. So it was just those kind of considerations and that give and take that I think that I've learned from Jim Lavin. Some other things that I've learned from my basketball coach, James Calhoun, or Jim Calhoun. Everyone else knows him. He's a super famous college basketball coach. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, but he was hard-nosed and he would yell at you. And only time, matter of fact, he talked to me is when he was yelling at me. So you had to learn that. And one could say you develop thick skin from that. And yes, you definitely do. But we also had the highest turnover in terms of transfers out of a basketball program throughout my 4 years there. So in the nation. So, that's not something that's going to come up on the sports polls, or he's not going to mention it during his Hall of Fame acceptance speech, but it's a real thing. So, it depends on what kind of individual you want to be. Or do you want to just be, get the accolades and kind of do for self, or do you want to groom and kind of mold individuals who can not only do what you need, but be happy doing it?
So it's interesting. Those two examples are interesting examples. Jim, I think you said was the first name. I hadn't thought about Calhoun. It never occurred to me to ask that question. Even I know who that guy is. It's amazing. But, here's one guy who you described as kind of open and reliable, and he kind of modeled for you, if you know what I mean. There were things he did that you feel you could follow or emulate. And then with Calhoun, I'm guessing that wasn't so much an emulation thing. I don't know. But
no, it was learning what you don't want.
Right. Good point. In a wholly different context, I'm going to riff on what you just said. We talk about careers. It's really important to understand when you're early in your career that a lot of what you're doing with your first job or your second job is finding out what you don't like. Who's the boss you don't like? What's the city you don't like? What's the kind of work you don't like? I know it sounds negative, but it's really important to understand that the first job is almost surely not going to be the permanent job. So anyway, going back to Calhoun, that's a really interesting observation about him. Again, anybody who wants to ask a question can do so, but I'm going to ask you another question, kind of change course a little bit. You've taken a look at yourself. You said you did that, for example, when you decided to try to go back to UConn. And I'm sure you've taken a hard look at yourself many times in your life. What do you think you do best as a leader? And what do you kind of wish you had or could develop as a leader?
I think that being a leader requires you to take a hard look at yourself and be introspective. I mean, being an introvert and just being who I am in general, I'm very introspective. The pandemic has led me to be super duper introspective, probably more so than I would like, but it requires you to be introspective. And from that, you gain knowledge of or awareness of what you're great at and what you're not so great at. And I feel like for me, as I've probably already said a few times, is that I lean into the empathy consideration. I'm very considerate, or at least I would like to think I am. And I also am open to other styles of getting the same things done. But I also know that I have some blind spots, if you will, some opportunities to get better. That's probably a better way of putting it. And for those, that also means that as a good leader, you recognize those things and you put people in places or systems in place that helps kind of minimize those, if you can't eradicate them altogether, those weaknesses. And I just know that if you identify individuals in your workspace or in your group, and I don't want to just limit it to workspace because not everybody wants to be a leader in a workspace, but if you're a leader in your club or your a cappella group or your sports team or wherever you find yourself, I just think that a good manager or a good leader understands that there's good things about me, but it's not the only way that I do things or things can get done. And just being open and being honest with yourself and allowing others to kind of shine in the things that they're great at. So it allows them to, the common phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats, which is not always true when everybody uses it, but it is true when you're trying to accomplish one goal. So I think that those are the kind of things that I found. And I don't know if I totally answered your question, but I think that introspection leads to awareness, and awareness can lead to you being able to have a tactical way of being a good leader.
Do you think that maybe a secret superpower of somebody who's an introvert is introspection?
For sure. Highly analytical. You're in your own brain a lot because you're isolated a lot. So you're forced to kind of analyze and think about these things. And trust me, it's like 95% of my day.
Yeah. Half of my question, I might come back at you now with the sort of second half of that, which is what do you, when you look around you, I guess, or even inside of yourself, what do you lack? and you mentioned adaptability. It was my word now, not yours, but adaptability. That's something that is a strength of yours. Empathy. You can meet people where they are. That was your words. And there's a little bit of an irony or interesting aspect of that, which is I'm guessing early on you weren't. I'm guessing that you were allergic to the way things were at UConn at the beginning, just as an example, and stuff like that. And you kind of built that up. But what do you feel like still a hole? You mentioned blind spots. What do you still want to fill?
Empathy is a new thing that I've come across. If you asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't have even used the term empathy because I didn't express it. I moved very selfishly in some of the things that I was doing because I thought that's how you had to be. Again, might have been looking to the wrong leaders in regards to emulating pathways. And through going to the div school and my time of just growing up, actually, the maturation of a human being and the evolution of Johnny, I've found that, you can't just be so callous and cut off. Having feelings and empathy allows you to be considerate. Before, if without empathy, without those, I felt like I was just kind of like, it's my way. Everybody has problems. We all got things we need to get through, but we all have a goal to meet, and you got to do what you need to do to get there. And some of that is still valuable in certain circumstances, but not every case. And that goes back to the one size fits all thing. It's not something that you could do in every situation. And you can't talk to everybody that way because that's not how everybody receives information. But one of the things that I find that is an opportunity for me to work on is that though I have empathy, I'm still kind of new to the whole, expression of feelings and taking in feelings. For instance, the other day, one of my colleagues, she was going through something, and I felt terrible for her, and I almost wanted to, on her behalf, kind of advocate for her to be able to go home and take a day or two if she needed it. But she also started crying, and I don't know what to do with that. I'm the kind of guy that, I haven't cried in a long time, and not because I don't want to. I'm pent up. I should go for a good cry, I promise you. But it's just something that's been kind of shut off in me, and I don't receive that well. And I'm sure that it comes off as me kind of being a little cold, but in reality, I just don't know what to do with it. So instead of me being awkward and weird and having my hands in the air like I used to be, I'm trying to work on, embracing it a little bit and at least articulating where I'm at so the other person knows that it's not, I'm not intentionally trying to be awkward or standoffish. It's just, this is who I am. The same way I gotta accept them, I'm trying to articulate to them that hopefully accept me.
No, that's a good example, and you sort of put anecdotes behind it, which makes it even better. There are two questions that have popped up, Julian and Sharianya. And Julian, you want to go first and pop your question out there?
Sure, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Johnny. This has been great. Wondering if you could share a little bit about just kind of your process for or reflections on what connecting with purpose and action has felt like when you're feeling stuff. And I think you kind of got to some of this in your last response. And as somebody who also had a profoundly unhappy freshman year and was disconnected from sports, like definitely feel that. But just, as an introvert, is your kind of collecting yourself more an internal process of sorting and self-reflection and like reflecting on how you can better lead yourself? Or is it a pushing yourself to connect with others and find inspiration in other sources? But would love to hear your thoughts, and I'm sure it's on a lot of people's minds as pandemic year 2 rages on. So
yeah, it's a great question. And I think that being home for a better part of a year and a half required me, and I live by myself. I have my dog who's jumping on the couches as we speak, but it required me, it forced me to really look inside myself. After you get over the first wave of eating all your pandemic snacks and, thinking like, hey, we got a free 2 weeks off from life, and then realizing that this is going to be a while, I had no choice but to sit back and really reflect on myself, my relationships, both professional and personal, and what I could do to effectively make those things better. And I think that we all need to have a real conversation with ourselves. A lot of times, if you find yourself in a cycle of similar things happening over and over again, the common denominator is yourself. So you have to reflect and think about that, as you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't think that way, in terms of at least questioning and having a conversation with yourself. Now, the second part to what you said in regards to for some inspiration outwardly. And I think that I look to people who I try to model. Who do I see that is operating in a way that I would like to operate? And that's a lot easier said than done, of course. But, we got the great thing called YouTube and a great thing called the internet. And there's people out there who are showcasing ways to be great leaders or do the things that you want to do. Maybe you don't want to be a leader. Maybe you don't want to manage people. That's perfectly fine. Trust me, I'm a lot happier not being a manager of the department versus being the manager, because I could kind of leave my work at work versus having to think about everybody else's dynamic at the same time. So just, that's a conversation that you got to have with yourself. Do I want to be in these positions? What does leadership look like? Maybe you're a leader in your own household. Maybe you're a leader in your family. Like I said earlier, I'm first generation to go to school. When I introduce some of the things that I've done to my family, it doesn't resonate with them. Playing basketball at a high level, I got sisters that don't care about sports. I have no brothers and very few male cousins. So basketball wasn't a big thing to them. But here I am at the highest level of college basketball you could be at. And my family is like, okay. And then even when I got into Yale, I was like, I got into Yale. The first question from my mom was like, why would I do that to myself when I already got all these other plates spinning? So not the kind of reception you want to have when you're trying to take on these big things. But at the end of the day, you got to recognize that the older version of me would have had resentment towards that. And back to empathy and realizing, meeting people where they're at, I just recognize that these aren't the things that they care about. So I can't be mad at them that they don't share the same joy as me when I'm presenting it to them. And eventually they'll get to see it. And as time has gone by, now now that I graduated, my mom's planning this big blowout, party and everything. She's super proud. She got Yale. She's one step away from having Yale bumper sticker on her car. So, she's come around from it. And so it's just, meeting people where they're at and getting them the time to kind of grow and mature as they need to as well. So I know that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but I think it deserved a few extra words.
Oh, that was great. I love the common denominator is you, and I love that your mother's coming around. That's great.
But she's around. She's there now.
Yeah, that's great. Sharyanya, you had a question, and then after that, I think Tyler has one.
Yes. Firstly, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. So my question is about sort of how can a leader strike the right balance between a hands-off approach and a hands-on leadership approach, specifically so that even though they're giving their team the space to, do the task without micromanaging and figure out what works best for them, but still be able to intervene at the right moments to preempt problems before they start to actually emerge and become a problem.
Yeah, it is a bit of a double dutch situation. And for those who don't know what double dutch is, it's a jump rope game where you kind of just got to jump in at the right time and be able to, catch a rhythm basically. And there's no easy way of doing that. You have to, for me personally, it's giving people the opportunity to fail. And what I mean by that is, all right, let me have you set you up with whatever the task is. Let's say the task is to get, 100 files done by Thursday. And I'm going to say, here's what the task is. Now, today is Monday. If I'm tracking as a leader, I'm tracking what you're doing, externally. I'm not in your face about it. I'm not asking you where you're at on anything. I'm just saying I can track. I got systems in place to see where you're at in this process. And if you're at 10 files by Wednesday night, there's no way you're going to get 90 done in a day. I have to ask you about it, and I have to bring it to you in a way that doesn't come off as condescending, but more in a way that asking you what you, how do you plan on getting it done? Is there anything I could do to help you get it done? So on and so forth. Bring it to you in a real humanizing way. But you only get so many of those. And we have to be real with ourselves. And anytime when you're being a leader, there's some times where it just does not work out. And for me, being straightforward about it is the best way to handle it, rather than I've seen so many people to be super passive and passive aggressive about it. And those things they tend to lead to worse breakup or a worse situation down the line. So it's best to just address it up front. And you don't have to do it in a condescending way. You could be open to hearing the people's explanations, and you have to be okay with people not totally loving the way that you would address things. But so long as you're being fair and equal, you can't be mad at yourself.
So many good insights there. Earlier you mentioned empathy, which I think for you for most of us would help us understand that different people think different things are important, and they're going to react different ways to things. And then here you're pointing out something that's related to that, which is people aren't always going to come to the same place, and sometimes you just got to move on, even if they don't. Tyler, you had a question which relates to a classic kind of tension between leadership and followership, but why don't you ask the question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. And thanks for being here, Johnny, and sharing your insights. So my question kind of comes from a perspective of someone who also loves basketball. I played in high school, and I'm a Gator actually, but I follow all of college basketball. So I'm curious to hear, a little bit about a dynamic that is common in basketball, but also in, the workplace and a lot of different areas, this leadership versus followership dynamic. And, in your experience at UConn and kind of throughout your life, how have you thought about toggling between those two different, kind of unique roles, and any tips you might have for us in, doing that successfully?
Sure. I think sports in general have been a tremendous help in my life, or a tremendous asset in my life, to be able to kind of navigate my world outside of sports. But for me, I was a point guard in basketball, which means that I was the guy that kind of I was the captain on the court by default of position. I'm the person who has the ball in his hands the most. I'm the person that sets up his teammates the most. But I'm not the person that scores the most necessarily. And I think in life, that's key to understand of what kind of person do you want to be? And that goes back to the introspection, and that goes back to being real with yourself. What kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be the person that sets other people up and, kind of relishes in their wins? But if they're winning and they're feeling good, you ultimately get what you want to get out of it, which is winning a championship, and I got a ring in my closet because of it. Or do you want to be the kind of person who's going to, take 50 shots and win or lose, you got yours? And, hopefully you're the former rather than the latter in regards to winning. But I feel like that is what I see in a workspace. That's what I see on campus. I see sometimes in professors. Some of the professors, my best classes have been the kind of classes where the professor is open to the kind of learning that the students bring. Not having this regimented way of teaching that they've had for 30 years. And if you don't fit inside that context of how they teach, then you're a bad student. I feel like there was a lot of that. And I met some of those people at Yale, and I met some of the other people at Yale who are just open. If you guys have the opportunity to ever meet or talk with professors, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, they're a married couple. The best. They're the reason why I stuck with Div School, because I was going to quit that because I met some people who weren't teaching in a way that resonated with me, and they weren't willing to work with me on figuring that out. And I felt like I'm just putting a lot on my plate unnecessarily. So why am I doing it to myself? And then I met them, and they changed my whole perspective.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Terrific. And thank you for the question, Tyler. Really, really an important question. I had a couple other questions for you, Johnny. I want to honor everybody's time commitment. So we will wrap up at the half hour. But before we do, this may sound like it's repeating the same question I asked before. I don't think it is. What do you think what are one or two of the toughest challenges that leaders face in general? And I'm going to take one off your table before you even answer that. When we've asked Yalies for 10 years now that question, what are the leadership challenges that they face? By the way, the most posed question is like 80 versions of the following question: is how do I lead my friends? If you see what I'm getting at,
Yeah.
How do you be a leader and yet still have a good relationship with people? So I'm purposely going to take that off the table. But, are there another one or two that you can think of that are sort of brick walls that leaders often face, or that you've seen as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is having people acquiesce to the way that you're used to doing things. And I think that if you are deemed a leader, you are the leader because somebody somewhere saw value enough in you that felt like you could lead said thing, or you've naturally become the leader in certain groups and circles. Sometimes the team designates you the leader, and sometimes you're bestowed the leader on the outside entity. Either way, you have to create a vision that incorporates not only your style, but everybody else's style. In a utopia, we'd be able to, everybody would feel great about every decision that's made, but especially as you get bigger groups to lead, that's not the way it's going to be. So one of the big things is being okay with that, being okay with people not acquiescing to your style of leading, and realizing when you may need to separate or part ways, and also realizing when you may need to be a little more flexible. Maybe something you're doing isn't the best way to get it done or the most efficient way. And if you're open enough to hear it from somebody else on a way that could get it done, you may want to take that into consideration.
Yep. No, that's a great insight. And then just one last question, and then I want to kind of wrap things up. And we're so grateful for the time you're spending with us. I know everybody who's listening in right now is sort of all different backgrounds, but what do you have advice is sort of something that you kind of wish that you had done more of while you were a student, that either relates to leadership or not, or just sort of becoming a better person? I don't want to call it a regret, but do you have advice, for the folks on the screen who are current students?
Well, one of the things that I didn't do when I was at my undergrad at UConn is I had tunnel vision. Like I said, I was very selfish in my progression. I wanted things to kind of bend my way and not be flexible in other ways. And because of that, I think I've missed out on opportunities, wasn't considered for opportunities, and probably, didn't make as many friends as I probably could have, just not being open. I was determined to remedy that on my second go around of going to school here at Yale. But my circumstances were a little different here. I was actually working full time here and had a family, and just things, business, book, all these things that are kind of time consuming. So it didn't allow me to kind of really sit in and take in all that Yale had to offer in terms of divinity and just networking in general. But I implore you guys to have real conversations with yourself as to what you're trying to get out of this thing, because it's one thing to just go through the cycle, because going through school is like the pathway to get you to a career, but it's another thing. I think I think Julian mentioned it, it's another thing to find your purpose. And finding your purpose in life, the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can have a conversation with yourself, the better off you'll be, because you'll be more in tune. You'll create your values around your purpose, and then you'll be leading with more intention. And I think that is the biggest thing that I would tell you guys to do. If figure out what it is you want, lean into your purpose. That will help you lean towards your purpose, and then just walk in that purpose.
That's great. I must say I was kind of shaken because I've been taking notes about everything you're saying. I shared out with many of you on the screen will know this, but I shared out notes from the discussion with Brian. I'm going to do the same thing, Johnny. I'm sure I'll butcher, doing it the wrong way, but I'll do my best to sort of capture some of the essence that you mentioned. But I really was shaken because I was writing down the word purpose when you said it. I was interpreting what you were just saying as like looking at yourself and finding your purpose as opposed to finding your career. You know what I mean? And
purpose is the biggest thing. I mean,
it
it's one
is
of the bigger myths that we're taught is that you have to go find a career, but really you need to find your purpose, because then you'll be a much happier individual and you'll be able to execute things you'll just be more, it'd be more beneficial to yourself and everybody around you if you're doing what you feel you're meant to do in this world.
I feel like there's two things, and I think that's absolutely one is like, man, maybe it's like the ultimate thing is finding your purpose. But you mentioned relationships a few minutes ago, and there's very few times in your life when all of us are in such close quarters with such amazing people from whom we can learn so much and who we care about so much. I mean, it basically won't happen again. And so, taking advantage of that really matters. And
this is the one time where you're in close proximity with so many like-minded individuals that you won't ever get a time like this in your life again. We all branch off after we graduate or leave Yale, and you figure out your life from there. But this will be the one time where everybody they got their own missions, don't get me wrong, but they're all on a mission. And getting out your own way will be totally advantageous to you and your mission and your goal if you could do so. Don't allow some of the feelings and emotions, and some days it's hard, and not having a great first year experience doesn't mean the next 3 can't be awesome. I think that those are the things that sometimes, especially when you're in school and you're kind of in your own brain about it, you might regret later and you wish you could do a little differently.
Amen to that. In thanking you, Johnny, for doing this, really appreciate your being open. 2 or 3 people in chat along the way basically thank you for being open and authentic. And it's so important, the way that we can all learn. I've learned a lot from you by sitting in the courtyard and knowing that I'm listening to the real bird, not some false one. And so great, that's great. On a lighter note, Brian, when we asked him who some of his role models were, he mentioned his grandfather, which is great. And he mentioned 2 80-year-olds, one of whom might not be relevant to this discussion. The other of whom is Coach K at Duke.
No.
Yeah,
Ryan,
yeah. No, I had
Ryan.
to tell you that.
No. Coach K. I've met Coach K. He's okay. He's a good guy. He's for the wrong team, but he's a good guy.
So I couldn't resist telling you that. 2 more things for everybody. One is a shameless pitch for all of you to join the cross-campus community if you haven't already done that. 20,000 Yalies on cross-campus. More than 2/3 of them are not students. They're alums with whom you can trade notes. And by the way, of those 20,000 Yalies, 20 of whom 14,000 are alums, 2,400 have said they want to talk about leadership. I'm not making that number up. You can find that yourself on the filters. You can find out who those people are, and it could be part of your endless journey.
Oh, can I throw out a shameless plug? I'm terrible at
these
things.
Please.
In regards to introversion, back to purpose and passion. Introversion is very much my passion, talking about it, speaking about it, trying to eradicate the stigma or destigmatize the introversion as a whole. And in doing so, I'm doing 2 things. One, I invite anybody here who identifies as an introvert or cares about introversion. You don't have to identify as an introvert, but maybe you want to learn more about it or more it's an interesting topic, to reach out to me, contact me. You can email me. My email is johnny.bird@yale.edu. And on top of that, we're also starting a podcast around it called Into the Introvert, where we're going to talk about, it'll be led with introverted experiences, mine, but I would love to get some of you guys introverted experiences so we could talk about those things, because I know what I've been through as an introvert, and some of them are funny, some of them are not so funny, but I know that other people have been through things and I would love to speak on those things and kind of hear your stories. So feel free to email me or reach out anytime. But Into the Introvert will be the podcast, and we'll be getting that going soon.
Something tells me that this cause of yours, you're gonna take it a long way, and that's terrific. The last thing would be to remind everybody, next Friday, 4:30, next Friday, Lydia Martin, who is by her own description an advocate for well-being in the digital world, and she's taught at Yale. She wanted to call the seminar she taught at Yale sort of living in digital obesity, but she was told she couldn't use that title. But that's basically her cause, is like, how do we navigate the world when we're being bombarded? Johnny, thanks again. Thank you all for investing so much time on a Friday night and earlier on Friday afternoon. I'll share notes with everybody from all of this, and we will see you no later than next week. Have a good weekend.